Hi everyone, my name's Chris and today I'm going to be deconstructing LFO's classic track, LFO. This track is an absolute classic within the kind of techno genre. It's a techno track out of the UK in the early 90s. And it was written by Jez Varley, Mark Bell and Martin Williams. This was the original lineup of the group LFO. Martin actually left just before this track came out, and then Jez and Mark continued on the project for many years and had great success and became really influential within the scene. Mark very sadly passed away a few years ago, but his legacy very much lives on with all the incredible music that LFO created. So this track in particular, which is also titled LFO, was released in July of 1990 on a little known label called Warp Records. Well, it was little known back then. Obviously Warp is now a massive label, and this track was actually one of the first tracks that made the label what it was. It kind of brought them a lot of early success. Warp's gone on to be a huge label and has released music from the likes of Aphex Twin, Autechre and Boards of Canada and many, many more. In terms of the style of this track, it's techno, but more specifically a style called bleep techno. This originated out of the north of the UK, cities such as Sheffield and Leeds in the early 90s. And some of the key characteristics of this genre are kind of driving drum machine rhythms, sometimes with breakbeats sprinkled in there as well, kind of signature bleepy high-pitched lead sounds influenced from electro, as well as really kind of cavernous sub-bass. And this was an influence from sound system culture, genres such as dub and reggae. So yeah, bleep techno is kind of like a dub techno fusion before we actually had what is now commonly known as dub techno. In terms of the performance of this track, it was a bit of a crossover here. It was obviously intended to be an underground track for warehouse raves, but it actually reached number 12 in the UK charts. It's hard to imagine that happening nowadays with an underground techno track, but of course the climate for music was very different back then in the early 90s. I think more so in this chart performance, it's hugely influential. It still gets played out by DJs, 30 years later, and has influenced a whole generation of producers. So before I get into the deconstruction itself, let's take a look at some of the equipment that was used to make the track. So first off, we've got the chords that were made by the Kawai K1 synth. This is a 4-oscillator polysynth that was manufactured in Japan. We've also got the Casio FZ10. This was a rack-mounted hardware sampler, and this is where the bass sound was sampled from. Then the lead comes from the Gen SX1000. This was an Italian monosynth that came out in the late 70s. The track has a distinctive vocal part as well, and this came from a simple speak and spell kids toy. So yeah, it was quite an interesting use of that. And yeah, it was all sequenced together on an Atari ST, which as you can see is quite different from the laptop that I'm going to be using today for this deconstruction. Okay, so let's start taking a look at some of the parts that make up the track. The parts that I'm going to be recreating are the drums, the bass, the sub-bass, and then what I call the laser-like bass effect, and then we've got the chords, the lead, and the vocals. So there's 7 main parts. The first one that I'm going to start with is the chords, and I've got Logic Pro open at the moment. So let's take a look at what I'm going to be using for the chords. I had a little search online to see how the chords were made, and obviously I found out that they came from this Kawai K1. And I actually managed to find, incredibly, a free emulator for the Kawai K1. It's called Nils's Kawai K1V. It's by a developer called Nils Schneider, so big thanks to Nils for creating this. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing really. It sounds exactly like the Kawai K1. And yeah, for the track, for the chords, LFO simply used a preset off of this. The preset is called IC8 Arrangement. And yeah, let me just play the chord sequence that they used. Basically just a D minor chord shape followed by a C minor chord shape, just to hear kind of what's happening. Because you'll notice if I play one note, I'm just going to hold down the note D. We actually get 4 notes sounding, so what we're getting there is a minor 7th chord. We're getting D, A, F, and then C. And this is to do with how the oscillators are kind of set up within the synth itself. So if I click Edit here, where it says Edit Source over here is where we can access the different oscillators and we can see the tuning of the oscillators. So oscillator 2 is tuned to the root note, oscillator 1 is a 5th up, oscillator 3 is the minor 3rd, and oscillator 4 is the minor 7th. So that's kind of how the oscillators are set up. And just quickly, in terms of music theory here, I'm just going to open up this grand piano, and I've got some notes at the bottom here. You're getting a whole chord sequence because of how the oscillators are set up. For the first chord, you're holding down D minor, but you're actually getting 4 different chords that sound. Their root notes are based on the D minor 7 notes. So we're getting D minor, A minor, F minor, and then C minor. And then we get the same when we hold down the C minor shape for the second chord. We're getting C minor, G minor, and then we're getting E flat minor and B flat minor. Now I'm going to switch over to Ableton, just because I actually had a little bit of trouble using the Hawaii K1V plugin within Ableton. I think it may be to do with Ableton's recent update, but I'm not 100% sure. But luckily I was able to bounce out the audio from Logic and load it up into Simpler within Ableton. I'm in Ableton now, and what I've done is I've loaded the chords into an instance of Simpler. So if I just play the note C3, you can see that's going to run through all the chords. So all I need to do is just enable the recording, and then I'm just going to lay this chord down. All right, wicked. So that's the chords down. What I'm going to do is just open up the clip and get the volume nice and even, the velocity, and make sure it's running all the way to the end. And yeah, all I need to do now is just duplicate the chord down to where it plays within the track, like so. Okay, so that is the chords done. Next up, I'm gonna do the lead part. This lead was the one that comes from the Gen SX1000 on the original track. What I've done is I've had a go at recreating it using Ableton's analog, and you can see the patch that I've got down here. There's a few kind of important elements to note. If I just play the sound here, you can hear that one of the main things we've got is this filter envelope on. If I just turn this off, it has quite an important impact on the sound. It's got quite a sharp attack, and also the resonance value is quite high, and that's kind of what gives this its characteristic. So if we look at oscillator 1 quickly, I've got a pitch envelope on here, and it just comes up from a low pitch up to the regular pitch. And that again is quite important for recreating the characteristic of the original patch. So the pattern that we play is in the key of B flat minor. If you remember, one of the kind of chords of that evolving pad was B flat minor, and it goes something like this. So this is what is played in the intro. Let me just record that in. Cool, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the clip and pick which I think was the best version, probably the first to be honest. And I need to make sure that this note here is nice and snappy, because that's how it sounds in the original. I'm just going to name my clip as well. I'm just going to call it intro. Next up, we need to create a couple more variations of this lead sound that come a bit later in the track. On this scene down here, we have this variation. Again, using the same 3 notes, which is B flat, C, and then D flat or C sharp. So let's record in this variation. I think I got that in one of the first 2 there. So let's just crop the clip again. Okay, cool, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's just make sure the velocities are nice and even, like so. I'm just hitting Command A to select all the notes and then holding Command and dragging to alter the velocities. So I'm going to name this riff 2 because it's kind of the second main riff that comes in. And again, just duplicate the scenes down to where they need to be. And yeah, there's one more variation of the lead synth that we need to get in there. Goes a little something like this. So yeah, it's just got a kind of extra that little extra movement in there. So let's record this in. Again, just good practice. I'm just gonna make sure all the velocities are the same. So that's all the lead parts in now. Let's take a look at the drums. So the intro, we've just got the chords and the lead, and then after this, it's the chords, the drums, and the bass come in. And for the drums, I'm going to be using the Roland Cloud TR909 plugin. So let me just open this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the step sequencer built into the plugin to get the drums in. So all I need to do is click edit down here. That opens up our step sequencer. If I add in the bass drum, it's a simple 4 to the floor pattern. And what I'll do is I'll loop this and then start programming in the other parts. Snare on the 2 and the 4. And then open hat in between the kicks and the snare, but not in between the first kick and the second snare, which is a little bit unusual. So that's the basic drum pattern down. There's that rim shot that I added in there. That's actually very, very quiet in the mix in the original, but you can just about hear it. This drum pattern doesn't really have any variations. When the drums are playing, it's just playing this basic pattern. So what I've done is I've added a few effects, and I was starting to get quite a long chain of effects. So I decided I'd resample the drums, just so I don't have a huge, massive chain of effects. All I've done here is I've got an audio channel called drums, which I've set up. And under audio from here, I've got it coming from the 909 plugin. So all I need to do is record enable this, and then that will record the drums in. You just set this loop within the clip to a bar, and we have our drums there. So all I need to do now is copy the drums onto the appropriate scenes. And yeah, there we go, we have our drum parts. You'll notice that I'm copying to the scenes further down as I go through. This is so I can arrange it on the fly, so once I've got all the parts in, we'll basically be at the end. Next up, one of the real crucial elements to this track is the bass sound. I created it using 2 layers. The first of these is just a simple noise layer really, just like a noise oscillator. But the main bulk of this, of course, is the FM-like bass sound. And I used Operator, which is Ableton's built-in FM synth. And I'll just play you the bass part. So that's just on 2 notes, it's just on D and F, which are the first 2 notes of the D-7 chord. So I basically started off with this, which as you can hear sounds nothing like a bass. The first thing I did was I added this pitch envelope, turned that all the way up, so it's got like a nice clicky sound to it. And then I filtered out the kind of very high frequencies. The pitch envelope kind of gives it a nice punch, but I didn't really want the real high-end click. The most important part of this is the tuning of the oscillators. And what I'll do is, as I play, I'll bring up the level. And you can hear that we're getting some frequency modulation. And then I added in another oscillator as well. And there you go, we have our sound. Let's record in the main riff. I think I just about got it there. Make sure the velocity's nice and even. Cool, so I was just adjusting some of the note lengths there to make sure it was correct. I'm just going to rename the clip main because that is the main bass part. I will copy it over to where it plays. There are a couple of variations that we actually need to watch out for here. And one of them is on this scene when the drums, the lead synth and the chord are all playing as well as the bass. I need to just delete a couple of these notes to make room for another part which I'll be adding in a sec. And then there's another little variation that happens here when we get the third and final different take on the lead sound. I need to just extend the clip out here and delete that at the end, just adjust the clip length, and let me just add in the bass right at the bottom there. And then I'm just duplicating this over to the noise layer as well, just because obviously I want those to be playing the exact same MIDI clips. Okay, so we've got drums, lead, chords and bass. Next up, let's take a look at the vocals. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, was made using the Speak and Spell toy. Yeah, this was one that I had quite a think about how I was going to recreate it. And luckily I found this amazing plugin called BitSpeak that could be used to recreate the sound of Speak and Spell. So what I did first is, I'll just take the effects off. I literally just recorded me saying the letters LFO, and as you can hear, it doesn't really sound fantastic. LFO. So yeah, I'm just going to dial in the sends here. I've got like a hybrid reverb and a delay on my sends A and B. LFO. So that's sounding a little bit more spacious now, which is what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the mix all the way down. And as I bring the mix up, my voice is going to be transformed from what it sounds like into a kind of like 8-bit speak and spell voice. LFO. One important thing to note as well is I've got the rate set all the way down to the bottom as well, just to make it sound grainy and old school. And yeah, all I need to do is duplicate this clip down a couple of scenes here. 2 more parts to get in now, and the first of these is this sub bass sound. And what I've done here is I've just basically used a sine wave in Operator, and I've got the volume just quite loud, and I've had a little boost in the low end, just to try and recreate how it is in the original track. And yeah, the sub's just playing 2 notes in actually a similar rhythm to the bass line. It's just going like that. So I'm just going to record that in. Let me just double check that I'm happy with that. Get the velocities nice and even. And then I just need to duplicate this down to another scene here, and I'm going to delete a couple of the notes. And you remember I moved a few notes from the bass line, and now I've removed a few notes from the sub. And that is to make room for the very final part, which is this laser-like effect that comes in. And yeah, this is just playing the note C there. And yeah, this was a fairly simple sound to make actually. All I did is I used a sine wave, and I've got quite a drastic pitch envelope there. And also this time parameter is quite important as well. So I've got it around like 40% there. Got a nice little dose of delay on there as well via the send. So yeah, let's just record this in. I'm just going to double check the clip again. I think I'm happy with that. And I'll duplicate that down, the scene down here. Okay, so I mentioned earlier we're arranging on the fly, and that is because we've got our arrangement all ready to go. So yeah, I think it's just a case of triggering the scenes and listening to what we've got. So let's have a listen.
There you have it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this deconstruction useful. For more information on any of our courses, please check out pointblankmusicschool.com, and yeah, we'll see you next time.